the idea of our rock, the rock upon which our love is built, because that is where we all met. That is the idea.
I like that.
So seeing that he shared the collective journaling quote of the day, let's start with that. It is appropriate. I think we talked about this in the past. It's a quote from William Blake. The fool who persists in his folly will become wise.
Yeah. I love that.
Makes me want to look at the Fool card, but we're today doing the Two of Swords or the Two of Thunder, which in the Gentle Tarot, kind of a much kinder interpretation as it does usually. But it's like a woman kind of in the fetal position in the ocean, under the ocean. And she's got a little seal beneath her and a school of fish kind of surrounding her and some algae, seaweed wrapped around her. And I'll just I'll read off the interpretation of this deck. It says, I am at home with myself. I'm supported by the world around me. I will take the time I need to listen. This card is one of introspection. Listen and trust. Your heart knows best, and only good things can come from following it. It reminds us of the importance of looking within, silencing the unnecessary distractions, and tuning into what we want to keep in our sphere and what we can let go of. Could be simple or complex, but going within is necessary. Underwater, you are enveloped in that comforting womb silence. The critters are playful and accepting of your presence. Our natural environment seeks ecological harmony, just as our bodies seek spiritual harmony.
Yeah, so that was like less an interpretation and more of a wisdom that one might find from exploring personally. I think maybe the Two of Swords card, where it's like that, what do I do in this complexity? And it's like, oh, hold on, let's take a breath. So that is the nice thing about the Gentle Tarot, if anybody, is interested in this deck, is that it's bringing that wisdom in a already kind of nicely interpreted way. So I think I'm going to leave it there and just pass it for now.
Well, I've just got the Thoth and the Rider Waite laid out in front of me, and the first thing that occurs to me, thinking about the woman underwater, is is in the Rider Waite, there's the water in the background. So it's almost like the character has taken a step further back. Yeah. Like this wasn't far enough. Now I've actually gone under the water. And then thinking about that experience of being underwater, how like sound is kind of distorted in a way. I like when I'm in the bath and I go put my head completely underwater, I can hear my music perfectly clearly, like because sound is quite amplified in the water, but it feels different. I don't know quite, like maybe there's no actual different acoustics, but it feels very different to be listening underwater. And then my other thought about retreating underwater is that it's by very definition temporary, because you can't hold your breath forever. So like I've always thought of this card as kind of like a pause card, but adding the water element makes it very clear that this is a temporary pause before we continue on. Yeah. The other cool thing about the Rider Waite one is that there is a moon in it. And it's a waxing moon, so it's about beginnings, which is appropriate, being a 2, obviously near the beginning of the series. And then like the moon, you know the moon. The way she's like, hi, I'm the moon, and then she's retreats and then comes back. So about that periodic movement between interiority and exteriority, and like, and the importance of that kind of like dark moon introspective times like, and I've got loads I didn't realize I had so much to say about this. And specifically with the swords, you know, like they're defending her right to be and to have that private, quiet solitude. And because swords are obviously, you know, linked to air, that's like the mental defenses that we have to make to erect boundaries around our because often, you know, like that's the thing that goes, isn't it, when things get busy or people are expecting things of you, that time to be quiet and retreat is the thing that you give up. And she's like, nope, I can't even see you. And then coming around to the thought, what you get if you manage to do that thing is the blue flower, which is like a classic thing from like European Enlightenment type writing. I don't remember the details, but anyway, and I don't know if that's what's actually referenced by Lady Frida Harris in this art, but it makes me think of going in search of the blue flower, meaning that because blue flowers are pretty rare or magical, or I don't know, but they're like a metaphor for enlightenment in a lot of that European romantic writing. So yeah.
So as Rebecca was speaking, I was reminded of the tendency I had to just lie underwater and listen to my heartbeat, because that is, of course, very much amplified if you're underwater. If you're lying in the bath, you really hear your heartbeat very. So that, but I want to come back to, because this is the, I have these two. And this one, when as soon as I looked at it, it was like the image just, the idea just came to me of like being able to fight with both hands, a sword in both hands. And then that skill, because the underwater to me is very much symbolic of the unconscious. And the skill to and work with the conscious and with the unconscious and with the left brain and with the right brain. It's that is what the harmony in, because it's a mental, it's the swords, it's about the mental thing. So the skill in and knowing with your mind and knowing with your body, that type of thing, that's what came to mind for me.
Well, it's interesting because it's a 2, right? And as Rebecca was saying, you can put that then in the major arcana, the high priestess, whereas the high priestess isn't wearing the blindfold. And the water is deeper. It's not as shallow in that other Rider Waite card. And so there is also like this potential danger, right, of blinding oneself to the external world, of going too far, kind of deep in. I know I sometimes struggle with this of, you know, bumping up against something and then going, all right, I got to do all this like deep inner shadow work, and you know, I got to go in there, and actually what I need is to engage with the extra. I need to actually take the blindfold off, somehow like dancing between going underwater, going in underwater to the exclusion of the external.
A little bit of what you said was cut out, just so you know.
Oh, okay.
Kind of got the general idea though that there may be some instances where you have to take the blindfold off and really engage with the other, whereas there's also those times where you're diving under. And so I went snorkeling with a guy, and it's like when for ritual, you know, the silence, and how that was so similar to that, because we met and it was kind of chaotic how we met because there's traffic and it's noon and we're trying to meet, and it's also tourist season here, which I never go to the beach during tourist season, but here we are trying to go snorkeling from the beach. And so we get there and we get in the water, and he's a Navy guy, so he like at least can swim. And I can too, I can swim pretty good, but he was like, it's a yellow flag out, so do you think you can get out like 170 what meters? I don't even know what measurement of unit he used. Anyway, so we're swimming out and I'm like struggling hard, and I've got a snorkel and everything, and I'm trying to like communicate that to him by showing him that I'm just gonna like look at the beach and let waves hit me. And so he like swims back to me and he's like, hey, I was like, I don't think I can make it. And so he grabs my life jacket that I have on and starts pulling me. because that's kind of the message that I communicated to him by saying that I couldn't make it on my own. He's like, cool, I'll help you. So we get further out and I'm like, no, like if we go any further out there, I will drown. And I know I have a life jacket on, but I will die. So he's like, oh, well, we could just go to the bayside. And so we went to the bayside and we were out there for like hours and just swimming next to each other, keeping like it's your buddy. So you're keeping your eye on them. You know, it's also kind of murky. So I've got to stay a little bit close to him. And I'm always like looking for his fins and like, you know, it's a lot of fun. And also like being next to each other, like, you know, whoops, we bumped into each other. There's a lot of communication that's happening when we're not speaking. So that's like the interesting thing about getting to know somebody underwater, where you don't have that access to your voice and to, you know, and also we needed to communicate if we were to see marine life or anything. He was like, okay, now go underwater and hum. And so we had to like measure like, okay, how loud do I need to be in order for you to be able to hear me when we hum? So that was like what was coming up for me in this whole idea of like duality, understanding the other, kind of being underwater with the other and understanding, you know, and maybe making some mistakes sometimes, like maybe making those wrong decisions and like hitting each other and things like that. But then being able to always be in this process, like the moon, like you were saying, Rebecca, of, you know, building something, but then being okay with something breaking away and building on that. So
Thinking about what Lizelle said about, you know, underwater being like the subconscious or the unconscious or both. I was just thinking about what it means to meet people in the subconscious and how like sometimes you encounter your friends in dreams and you learn stuff about them, or you learn stuff about them, but like, is it really about them or is it just a product of your own dream life? And like that weird, yeah, I think we're so focused on communicating with words and text that the non-verbal communication is like muted, or we ignore it, or we deprioritize it. And then there's this other type of communication, which is like imaginal, that I don't even know what to make of that, but I know it happens because you guys turn up in my dreams and do weird shit. So, and I don't know if I should, what I'm asking is, should I hold you responsible for what you do in my dreams?
I just wanted to apologize, so maybe you should.
No, you don't really. But you know what I mean? Like there's that weirdness of like how you get to know people through, like I'd be reading a book and like it's a character that really reminds me of my husband, and then the character does something and I'm like, well, I need to talk to Paul about this. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that, but there's something about meeting people in the subconscious. Like maybe it doesn't have to be so isolated down there underwater.
I just like recently had a dream of talking of the blue flower of enlightenment. And I don't dream of John often, but I like, and last night or the night before I dreamt about him. And I dreamt I was watching, because it was the Tuesday I had an online lecture with him. And then that night I dreamt I was having an online lecture with him. And then suddenly I was in the same room as him. And then I said like, but how is it possible that I can be in this room with you so quickly? And he asked a clarifying question. He asked like, how do you think it's possible? Like just that. And then I was like, well, I must be dreaming. And I was so sad that I was dreaming, but if I played with that idea, it was the perfect entrance into lucid dreaming. So, that, yeah, dreaming someone else entering your mind while you dream, and then that enlightenment flower thing all is now like playing in my head. Sorry, Isa, like you were trying so hard to speak for such a long time.
No, I mean, it's fine because I also feel like I don't even know where I'm gonna land. There's like so many little threads, but yeah, the underwater thing, and I mean, Sarah also talking about snorkeling, it reminded me of my first time scuba diving. And that day, it was my first dive ever in the actual ocean, and the visibility was terrible. Like you couldn't see anything at all. Just like, yeah, some like big shadows, and that's it. You can only see someone if they were like right in front of you. And everyone after that was like, oh, so sorry, it must have been a terrible experience. And I was like, no, I loved it. It was great. Because to me, like was something about that. It felt like floating in this nothingness that felt interesting. And even just today, like it's raining so much, it's incredibly foggy, so you barely see anything, like the buildings are covered. And I think it's also a bit of that. And I think it might be the same with the blindfold. It's like it's being in those moments where, because the blindfold to me is not necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna ignore the outside. I mean, yes, it's ignore the outside, but it's because I need to kind of have a different sensibility, or like heighten some of my senses in a certain way. And my experience scuba diving that day was kind of like that. It was like just the fact that I couldn't really see far away. So it wasn't really even about looking at the sea life or whatever. It became much more about like trusting the people around me when we can't even barely see each other, and just kind of enjoying the experience regardless. So, and that whole thing about being able to see really far or see really close is also interesting to me, because I heard someone talk about the sacred as some sort of like far away pole that everyone can reference. So that's kind of what we build the like shared narrative upon, is like, oh, we all have that mountain over there, or we all have that thing over there that is like a common narrative anchor for everyone, and that's why it's sacred. But part of me is like, oh, but I feel like the sacred is not always like over there. Like there's moments when it's here. And I think that's a little bit of what this card is talking about. And maybe that's the duality I see if we talk about pairs. Is like, when is it a time to see the sacred that is out there, and that is a reference for community and culture and things that we share with other people? And when is it like right here inside of me, and it's this thing that is like anchoring me to life? So those times of low visibility, being underwater, kind of felt like those things. Like, it's not about what's far away. There's moments for that, but this is not one of those. And yeah, that's kind of what came up for me.
I just want to point out, I think it was beautiful, and there's so many things that happened, but I just want to point out that instances of lying underwater and listening to my heartbeat, that's exactly what I meant with it. That's the moments when the sacred is right here. That thing that anchors us to life, because that's the heartbeat, right? So
Well,
thank you.
It makes a lot of sense, like, too, because she's in the fetal position underwater. Like, where do we come from? We all start off in that amniotic fluid in that fetal position. There's something too here, I think, about like remembering, like that we can actually go back into that place of where we came from, that it's kind of always with us. That kind of underwater world is always accessible. That we can dance in the world and actually still and hold that underwater world simultaneously. I think that's sometimes the sweet spot that I feel.
Yeah, I think, well, going on that, the interesting thing that keeps bubbling up, so now I'm just going to say it, is I was rewatching that last Stoa public event, and one of the things that was mentioned was how, I have neighbors below me and I don't talk to them. It would be really great to engage downstairs too, just as I do here. And that was something very interesting about all of these online communities and things during the pandemic, was we did have the soul right here. And it was like, you could go to a place, and wasn't like actually leaving. And it was like the fire was there. The soul fire was just in the middle, and everybody's contributing their own to it, but it just got bigger. It was not a place where you were going and it was taking from you. So yeah, in making our decisions, like in this kind of like dual, what do I do? Or like I'm perplexed. And I need to like eliminate certain senses from my existence. Well, for me, it was cutting off the uncertainty of other people, as I put it. So the only uncertainty that I really had was people that I was knowing, my family and things like that. And so that kind of was my compass. that love that I was given from here, like I was just consuming at that point. I was just consuming their love at that point. But really trying to figure out, like, from where do I make a decision? Because my ex used to say things to fuck my head up. Like, if you're going to make a left turn, you should make a right. Like, literally would say things like that. In my head, I did not realize at that time how much it was programming me to actually believe these things. So directionless was exactly what I was. And so being introduced to astrology also gave me like a way to orient based on the stars, but it was very abstract and out there and I couldn't ground it. And so then I had like the space to ground in community, wanting to know more about it, and also just finding community around it. So I don't know what this has to do with like the swords, the Two of Swords, but just like in our navigation of these decisions as they come up throughout the path of life, there's something about that soul and like really ensuring that you're moving in the direction towards that soul embodiment. So continuing to find it external, but also continuing to reflect on it inwardly. So I'm sensing like meditation from this too.
Yeah, in the Mayan tradition, they have like the watery soul. Like they consider the soul kind of the watery soul, and then that's your very particular, your very own unique essence, like your thing to contribute. And there's just certain things that you love that no one else loves and can do in this world. And so this also kind of harkens back to that, or at least that's what's coming up for me, is in that kind of submerging under the water, remembering, going back to that watery soul, to that, what is it that makes you come alive? What is it that, like, what is the choice? What's the right choice for you to make? It's not going to necessarily be the same choice that your boyfriend or whomever, right? And again, returning, I love that, the heartbeat, because again, if we go back to that womb, it's like going back into the womb, into the eternal heartbeat. And that's what I feel like, that's how I find myself making a lot of decisions, is my pulse, is the pulse that I'm feeling in alignment with something like bigger, you know? If there's like all this like pulse that's like, the heartbeat is all erratic, then it's like, fuck, like I either need to wait, like this is not, like a good decision isn't going to be made from here. It's when the pulse is in this like rhythm that allows me to relax and allows a kind of stillness to come up. And that's often when I know, okay, this is the direction you need to move in. But yeah, you've got to go in. I mean, that's what I find is I've got to go into that watery place to hear that heartbeat, because there's so much fucking noise in this world and it can be really hard. Everyone's pulsing at a different fucking frequency rate. And like, where's my vibration? Where's my pulse, you know? So.
That listening, Holly, a couple of times in our conversation, you brought up listening. And we never really went into depth in that. It was always just mentioned and then, but that listening comes up again.
This is making me think of a ritual practice that I've been doing, I don't know, like maybe a couple of years, every so often on the full moon, usually. No, I think I've only ever done it on the full moon. And it's, I don't even know how this fits in. So when I was a kid, I have this memory, and I don't know if it's a real memory or not, of visiting like a very old grandma, like an aunt. In my head, she's an aunt, but I don't know who she is in my actual family. And like, yeah, there's no real way for me to find out if this was a real person or it might have been like a friend of the family. Anyway, she lives in this beautiful house, like a cottage, and it's all flowers and stuff. And she has chickens outside, which was rare for me. I didn't know anyone with chickens. And I go inside and she's in a rocking chair and she's got her feet in a big bowl of water. And I have this really clear image of it. And maybe it's something I dreamed or saw on TV, but and then in the last couple of years, that image has come back to me again and again. And I've been thinking about this character and what her deal is. And I sort of decided I should start experimenting, as one does, and see what she's getting out of this experience of sitting there so still and meditative with her feet in the bowl of water. So I have this washing up bowl, which is actually the bowl that I I was purging into during my ayahuasca trip. So it's got a lot of associations. And that trip was on a full moon. And I remember taking the bowl home, and in the taxi, looking at the moon and looking at the bowl and being like, it's a white plastic bowl. Ah, hello. And then, yeah, so I filled that up with seawater naturally, and put my feet in there and lie back. And, you know, like my knees tented. And there's a way in which it really helps me travel. I can travel. I can like focus on being here, conscious in my brain, and then through a little narrative story, of like a, like a shamanic journey. You have like a hole you go down. I have my own hole that I go down through my mind, and then also through my body, through my feet, and into this underwater world. And then I come up from the water, and I'm in this space that exists in my mind, and it's like a landscape, and that woman lives there in that landscape, and I can talk to her. But it's like there's something about this, just because of the, like the high priestess, she's standing in front of the veil, or sitting in front of the veil, whatever she's doing, and then this woman is behind the veil. Maybe that's like the next level. And then the card that Holly's got is in the water behind the veil, and there's something about like this, the way water can take you through and back and down into something, into something. And like, and when you get, like Isa was saying about, the difference between the sacred out there and the sacred in here, but there's something about like when you get deep enough down, the sacred in here becomes the sacred out there. Like there's a weird switcheroo. And I don't know, I feel like this is like practical instruction. This is like, it's not just I mean, and maybe all the cards are, maybe there's a ritual to be found in every single card that will, but it's like, yeah, if you lift two, maybe you don't have two swords, but two sword-like objects, and blindfold yourself and sit like that in that stress possession, maybe something would happen. With the sea at your back, like there's something amazing about praying by the sea, and you say whatever you say, and then you listen to the sea. And I don't know what's going on here, what's communication is going on, and I'm imagining, I've got a whole crazy story in my head as usual, but I'm imagining now that the conversation between her and Holly's woman in the water, who's like here.
I think there's also, to me, because I think trust is another word that comes up in the text for this card, if I remember correctly. And there's something also about that, about like choosing to do all of this while not facing the water. Like that's pretty strong to me as well as the imagery. Like her back against this infinite. There's like, I can't see. I'm blindfolded to the front, and then behind me there's also all this immensity. There's something about that too.
It makes me wonder if the tide's coming in or out.
I feel, yeah, because it's shallow water. That's something I'm like really focused on, is that shallowness too of that water.
But it's, if you connect it like Holly did in the beginning to the priestess or the high priestess card, number 2, then that's very symbolic as well, because I always see the role of the priest or the priestess as representing the divine or the source to the people. So you will kind of sit with your back towards the source, towards, and then face the people as an in-between, a mediator. So that's kind of then what I see there. And yeah, it's even more beautiful if the tide is coming in, if she's like about to be engulfed by the source.
And I just to add on to that, because I like that a lot, just what that tells me as well is like, if it's your back against the source, that means to me that the way the source comes through you is not through your eyes. It's gonna be like through the pores of your back or something, through like the goosebumps in your hairs. It's something like it's not something that you will catch with your senses and you can process right away. It's even going to be, I don't know, like in the movement or something, the wind behind you. So that's also really interesting, is that your back is pretty devoid of sensory organs. So it's quite interesting that it's also kind of saying that, oh yeah, if you're gonna get contacted by the source, it's not gonna be through what you think it's gonna be.
It's super sensual.
It's not gonna be conscious. Not very much, at least.
But in my mind, what Rebecca talked about earlier, when she talked about how are we imaginally connected in the unconscious, in each other's dreams and things like that. So that is also connected, that imaginal connection in my mind is also the woman under the water on Holly's cards and the woman in front of the water in Rebecca's cards. They're imaginally connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a different card just to throw us for a loop, because mine is from the, sorry, I'm not going to hold it still. It's 2 feathers from my Labyrinth deck. And I love it because Sarah's the fool in that deck. And it's interesting because we're talking a lot about water and a lot about emotions and things like that. And for me and for all of us, this is the element of air. And so it's cool because these feathers can be waterproof. I'm thinking about the heron because we actually saw a couple of blue herons where we were on protected land where we were snorkeling. So yeah, and I don't know, just something majestic there about seeing a blue heron. And I've seen one when I was actually dog sitting in Kentucky too. So that image has been following me around. And I've worked very intimately with feathers because I've also worked on ducks doing taxidermy. And there was something really just like real about dealing with death in that way, of preparing it and fluffing it out. And I mean, the way that feathers can just come back to life once you've dunked them into water a whole bunch after, you know, you've taken everything out, they just, after a couple of washes and rinses and then blow drying them, it fluffs up and it's just so beautiful. There's so many different types of feathers. There's primaries and secondaries and down feathers, and they've all got beautiful iridescent like shininess to them. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to appreciate the feather here for a moment and just think about how it can be in both the water and the air and function so well to, yeah. And also feathers are really interesting because feathers and scales are very related too. So yeah, something interesting there too, just about protection and that outer layer. And yeah, so I don't know, I just wanted to present some air as I should, because that is my element.
I don't know if you...
I just want to point out I have a feather from Holly's land with me.
Oh,
Talking of the imaginal connection through
the very real connection. Yeah.
There's something interesting too about having to represent air with other things, like an earthy feather or a watery. This is the difference. Like there's always that contrast of air. It's only to understand it by what it is not. And I should just say, as the Aquarius moon here, always feeling this sense of estrangement, this sense of not being part of. So air really has this. It's this thing about not being seen, but it has so much power to it. But it's just always running in the background. You never see the air, but you're always breathing it in. It's so intrinsic to your being. And so, yeah, air has a bit of a complex about it, of not being seen, not being noticed, and having to be represented by what it is not. And so I say that as Aquarius moon because my moon is the third stage, you could say, of the air signs. And that's actually, we have more Aquarius energy in here, but I'm intimately related with that energy of feeling like the black sheep, feeling left out because of that. What Aquarius is, it's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn defines the boundary of the abyss and our solar system. So as we call it, the sublunary sphere. So all of this matter, everything that matters here in our solar system, that is part of Saturn's dominion, but he also has all of that out in the abyss, all of the heavens, the subconscious that we're talking about. And so he's always riding that line of, you know, I matter a lot, but actually I don't. And so that's something too about air that I need to presence.
Mm. I love that association you made with scales and feathers, because sometimes when I'm looking up at the sky, like, is that water for the birds in some ways? Like my imagination goes into seeing how birds swim in the air. And then my mind starts to like play with like, yeah, what if the sky is actually the water? And what if there's like this interesting sort of invisibility to water as well, especially when it's really still. It's just this pure reflection, kind of as above, so below, right? And just that fractal piece of things just mirroring and reflecting each other. And yeah, like it's not always as it seems, and there's so much territory to play in, you know. But yeah, the scales and the feathers too, having such similar patterns, and the adornment of all that as well. And I learned that I guess adornment, part of the etymology of adornment, it has to do with patterns. So it's kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, I'm glad you presence the air in all of this.
I don't know if they're not here right now, but maybe you've seen birds fly over as we're talking. They are house martins. They nest in my roof, and they are a great example of exactly what we're talking about. They are because they look like killer whales. They look like orcas. So they're black on top and white on the bottom, for the same reason that killer whales are that way, because it means they can't be seen from who they don't want to be seen from above and from the bottom. So from the fish under them looking up, they're light colored like the sky, and from any potential predators looking down, they're dark colors like the depths, which is the same reason the house martins are those colors. And they've just, you know, convergent evolution got like almost really close to identical color schemes going on. And like I have the same experience as Holly's describing, of like looking at them going about their business in the sky, and like, you're like the whales of the sky, you're amazing, a tiny whales of the sky.
And that invisibility that Sarah talked about, that they actually evolved to be invisible, like the air.
And it just generally is making me think more about the relationship between air and water, because in a way I can fall into this you know, negative way of thinking of like these two elements are enemies, because water is the emotions and the intuition, and air is the mind and all the like boring sensible stuff. But obviously that's not fair on poor old air. And the only way that I can interpret my emotions is through thinking about them. Like at some point the feeling has to stop and you have to start thinking about things. And so air is a way of bringing emotion and intuition and the subconscious into reality, like, because otherwise it just stays this kind of nebulous stuff. So yeah, I'm thinking again about the woman with the crossed swords, and like she's like, no, I need to go back behind thinking to a space to rest, but then when the time comes, I uncross my swords and I process and I think about that experience, and I can bring stuff into the world, like the sword being like, you know, the active principle of will, or what it makes a difference and makes things happen.
There's something maybe to play with there, with the fact that behind her is the water, and then in front of her is the sword, the thinking. And I was thinking earlier, and maybe it fits in here, but I don't know, maybe we can play with it. There's thunder in the water. In your deck, Holly, the swords are thunder.
Yes.
And there's thunder in the water, which is kind of really dangerous, I think. But maybe that's exactly this tension of the thinking and feeling.
Oh, that's really interesting. Somebody just told me that she had a dream of a tsunami happening, but what she saw was under the ground, the ripples. And she said, but it wasn't the rippling of the ground, like it wasn't the ground, but she saw in the water the ripples. And so for some reason that image just came back to me of like her having that dream, and how many different things are combined in there for her to have any sort of understanding of what was happening, because it only became later that she realized what that dream was about when she talked to her sister, and her sister was like, did you hear about the tsunami or something that happened? She was like, oh, that's what my dream is about. So it was almost in that way, like she was connecting it in this way that it felt like she had seen the tsunami before it happened. But yeah.
I think dreams about tsunamis is a pretty typical dream, actually, about being overwhelmed by the unconscious. And maybe that's why the woman needs the swords. Maybe your thinking protects you from being overwhelmed. Your conscious thinking protects you by being completely overwhelmed by the ocean at your back, or being in the ocean.
I'm still really haunted by the images. I think it was like 2002. There was a big tsunami in Southeast Asia. Was that 2000? I don't know.
Long ago.
Yeah, long ago. But I remember seeing, because I was traveling, and that was our next destination to go to. This was around Christmas time, and yeah, we were heading off to Thailand, I think, and we arrived in the aftermath of that tsunami. But I remember seeing the footage on TV of that, because like before the big wave comes, it just draws out, and like there's nothing, like nothing. It just, the tide goes so far back. It's really, I mean, obviously you know what's going to happen, so there's like, but even like there's just something so creepy about it, so uncanny about it, and like all the animals and all the birds just retreat because they sense something's going to happen. And then all these holiday makers are like, whoa, look how weird this is, and they're like dancing around in the shallows, and it's just like, it's like I've seen a lot of horrible things in real life and in movies, but that water roaring back, like it's still like, yeah, it still has the power to really like deeply trouble me, and I've had dreams about it as well. Yeah, it's like it's coming, that water is coming, and they don't know. And I guess that's another thing about that pause, isn't it? Like the pause, whether it's, you know, the introspection and then coming back, like when you come back, you have to come back sooner or later, and then stuff's going to happen. And like that could be wonderful stuff or it could be horrible stuff, but it's like, I don't know, I just like a really strong image in my head of that empty beach.
It's a very powerful lesson. I mean, superficially, just listen to the animals.
Yeah.
If the animals run away, maybe you also want to consider heading in a different direction. And the other, I do feel nature is really trying to tell us a lot of things, COVID, and we're just not listening.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, maybe in some way, the answer is something about like learning the way to relate air and water, you know, like maybe that's like a lot of the thing that we're not listening to is coming into, you know, being able to dance those two elements together, and feeling and thinking. Yeah,
both hands.
Yeah. And instead of doing this like switching between one and the other, or just existing in one and refusing to acknowledge the existence of the other. Yeah.
I mean, enlightenment comes from clouds, which are like water in the sky. You know, I was now as like lovers in some ways. You know, the lightning kind of coming from the water, like returning in some ways, and that attraction.
Clouds are like the babies of air and water, aren't they? Like if air
Yes,
and water get together.
Yes. And in Mayan myth, that's actually that is how they conceptualize like the clouds, that it's the marriage of the moon, like the moon and sun's daughter with the ocean. The moon and sun's daughter is like actually river, but yeah, that's the clouds are their babies. The clouds are the children. Earth and ocean.
And that makes me think of how you can like look at the clouds and see stuff in them, and like my experience of praying by the sea and listening to the sea and the white noise, and you can hear voices in it and stuff, if you're in the right frame of mind. And the same is true of clouds. Visually you can see shapes in them. So something about like the product of mixing, if you mix up the air and the water, the feeling and the thoughts, and then you look at the shapes that occur out of that, there's wisdom in that, but it's not like it's fresh. It's not just like you chewing your own cud. It's like bringing in new. Yeah, I don't know.
And then how the air also makes the ocean dance. So there's like a play element too. It kind of keeps things kind of beautiful and moving and dancing and not static.
Yeah. What I keep thinking of, because we've been talking about swords and stuff, and that saying in English, I think you say like being caught between a rock and a hard place. The Spanish version of that is being caught between a sword and a wall. So it would say estar entre la espada, which is sword, and la pared. So I was thinking like, oh, okay, like then what if that wall was made out of water? So kind of like that lady in the picture, then you would just kind of fall into it, and that's how you get out of that tricky situation. So it's again making me think like, oh, maybe the way out of those hard places is actually through the unconscious. Like there's something about letting yourself fall back. And even when you do that, I mean, it also reminds me just about going back to scuba diving, is like that's how you jump into the water. You don't go front, you just go back so that water doesn't go into your nose. So yeah, I think there's something about this. Like you can't push against the sword. You gotta kind of make the wall liquid and fall through it. I don't know, that's what I was imagining when we were talking about this. So yeah, the saying is a little bit different in Spanish.
Interesting because it brings up something that I was talking to my mom about, where it was the question of neglect versus rejection. So she said that she got to a point where she preferred being neglected over being rejected. And that is almost like a rock in a hard place or a sword in a wall. It's like, do I want to be out? Like, do I want to express myself and then have that shot down? Or do I want to just not and that be okay? Because then it's no disruption, haven't caused any, stir. And so as long as I'm out of sight, out of mind, that's kind of how she felt about her relationship. And yeah, I think that that's very relatable, because sometimes we're even like afraid to go in and say how we really feel about something because we're worried about losing our job. Like, I'll just presence this. Yesterday, I was 5 minutes late, and my manager approached me and said, hey, just wanted to let you know they don't like it when you're 5 minutes late. So just take this as your verbal warning. The next one will probably have to be a written one. And I told her, I was like, I'm not going to pick up my phone and call you when I'm on the way to work. And I'm certainly not going to pull over and get later to work. So if I'm going to be 15 minutes late or 30 minutes late, then I would know ahead of time and I could call you. But this 5 minute late thing, this wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything that I could really do anything about. And I wasn't going to stress myself out trying to rush to a job that is, my dad always says, I was looking for this job when I got one. So there are plenty of jobs. I'm not going to kill myself to try to get to this job. And because I said that, she was like, I have a lot of respect for that. And I said, if you ever needed to approach me and say that, this was a fire you or keep you on situation, I've drawn the line. That's it. I will not risk my life for this job. It does not mean that much to me. So that was like a clear, easy, yes, can make that decision. And it needs to always be that way when, it's this question of relationship, because I think that was something that was it was allowed to go on for too long. This idea of, oh, it's okay, I'm just running in the background and just keep things going because you're not appreciated. And then it starts to look like, oh, all you're doing is bad things, because all I notice is the bad things that you're doing. And so all those good things that you do that run in the background, you don't get any credit for it.
Yeah, I'm thinking again about the interplay of water and swords, or water and mind, and like how all that emotion has like all this information to it. And swords are, they cut things off, they create things, right? They can whittle things, you can use them to play. And how to use the information from the water, from the emotion, in order to create. It's almost like the water in some ways is like this experience that informs how to create something, and how to, like you're saying, Sarah, sort of create, use that emotion to sort of direct and cut off like what doesn't need, or to create or to make something with the sword using the mind. To create something that feels authentic and honest and generative, that creates more possibility for us in the future.
It makes me think of boundaries. I mean, obviously what Sarah was doing was setting a boundary, and like water is kind of boundless. It just sort of goes everywhere and slops around. And I guess air is too, but in its representation as swords, that feels very boundary creating to me. And like boundaries obviously have a bad reputation because like no one likes to be hemmed in, but also we recognize how incredibly valuable they are, and they give us structure, and they protect us. So yeah, I don't know, something about that. I love that. I love that story of you asserting yourself and setting a boundary. It's inspiring because it's something I struggle with, and I think there's something in that in this card about boundaries.
There's something liberating about being rejected, which is missing from being neglected. It's
The very next day I posted something that said that exact same thing. That's your invitation. When somebody rejects you, that's your invitation. Perfect. Now I know that's not for me.
Yeah, because rejection is actually an inclusion into something else.
And when you're being neglected, you're still wanting that thing. Like it's still an ongoing, like, oh, I'm just waiting for the time when I'm just waiting, I'm sort of waiting. When you're rejected, it's like, okay, fine, it's done.
It's like dying from first neglect. Well, there's other sources of water, but you're so set on this and focused on this because that's what neglect that word does.
Rejection makes me think of what Sarah was saying earlier, that you define air by what it's not. So rejection is also a little bit of that. It's like
the negative, yeah.
Like when you try to draw something by drawing the background, and you just like delineate the silhouette. Yeah. But I think it is true that we, in general, we seem to struggle with rejection a lot. I think it's something that I've heard so much, and regardless of, I don't know, gender or age or culture, I think it seems to be quite a thing, like the fear of rejection. I'm just curious why.
Well, it used to be like a death sentence if you were rejected.
Yeah.
Well, think about like how we're born. We're rejected from the womb. You know, like, I mean, that's one way to look at it. Like, so it's kind of embedded, it's imprinted in us. We're in this cozy little space of our mother's body. and then whoosh, like a pretty, like, rejecting dramatic. So we all know it.
I'm not sure if I agree. I don't know. But most, if the birth goes well, the child is participating in the birth.
Yeah.
To a very great extent. So it's not just the mother rejecting, the child is also struggling to get out. So that doesn't feel like rejection to me. That feels more like a release and a co-conspiracy for release.
Definition of another. It's like the moment that the two become, or the one becomes two. And so there you have what Isa was just talking about, the silhouette that you draw. It's like that, yeah, the image of the cutout of the body, literally. But yeah, that perfect whole has now separated.
In that sense, reject, yeah.
It's
And then we cut the umbilical cord with a sword.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really like playing with that rejection because I really do. Like that is actually like something that like it's the weirdest thing, but it's one of those things that I find myself attracted to because of like mixed up programming, I think. So it's something that I've been working out, is like not being attracted to the ones that are rejecting me, not being attracted to the ones that don't see, like, appreciate. And now I'm finding those that do actually appreciate me and want to explore me and aren't just interested in, you know, aesthetically this, but like actually have some interest in exploring deeper. And so, yeah, it's interesting too how rejection is something that you sense because of thinking. It is, I mean, maybe baby animals that their mother is nursing only one of the babies, because that does happen in like certain species where they find the one that's going to make it and then they really start to feed this one. I don't, but like you wonder, maybe I just do, the emotional capacity of the other runt that's not getting fed or whatever, you know, does it feel rejected, or is it just like, I'm really hungry? It never turns towards me. Like, I don't know if there's a conscious thought there, but something interesting about the rejection. Well, yeah, like you're saying, like maybe like the basis of emotion is that fact that we have the consciousness, the conscious ability to think thoughts.
Well, you know, there's like, I don't know, maybe Lacan, or I don't know, one of those guys, one of those continental philosophers, talking about the idea that pre-mirror stage, so before babies have language or anything, they are just completely connected to everything. They're not aware that they're separate, and then they look in the mirror metaphorically and they're like, oh, I'm a object in this world and there are other objects in this world and my mother is not the same thing as me, like, and then from there on we learn to differentiate and learn to carve up the world, you know. Yes. Which is the only way that we can interact and interpret the world. But that almost feels like, I don't know if rejection is the right word, but like you're being ejected, maybe ejected is a better word, from that completely like nebulous, watery, it's just like another amniotic sac mentally. And then it's like, oh, now everything's, and it kind of makes me think, because I'm always like, yeah, I'm always looking for the next thing, like then what's the next, like, you know, when we die, what's going on there? Is that another ejection into something
Back to the water?
Yeah.
So
big sphere that looks
yes,
like a belly.
well, I was just thinking, like, you're talking the zodiacal. This is exactly how we talk in zodiacal terms when you go around the wheel. Aries, you're born into this world. Taurus, you're nourished by your mother. Third is Gemini. Gemini is when you get this intellectual understanding of object-subject relationship. And then that is actually followed by your emotional understanding, which is Cancer. So you actually get, you get nurtured, and you, like you're saying, like you are embedded in, you are part of still all of it. And then once you get the Gemini subject object relationship, Then you move into Cancer. That's when you move into your emotions. And then you move into Leo, which wants to be in the spotlight. Virgo, he gets dissed off the stage. And then Leo or Libra, you balance out that feeling of feeling like shame as well as wanting to be seen. After Libra, then you go into Scorpio, then you go into the depths of your emotions. And so it continues. And but that exactly what you were describing, I was like, whoa, that's Gemini. And I just want to say that, well, of course, Gemini is air. And Gemini was, I think, the previous new moon when we were meeting for our off-camera meeting. So yeah, Gemini was still here. Gemini moon was still present. Interestingly enough, though, it's the Capricorn full moon that we're coming up on, and we keep saying like you have to represent air by something else, and so here we're going to represent it with earth, and that is to me what swords kind of is, because it's material, and also feathers kind of are because they're material too. So yeah, cool how it still kind of relates with the moon cycle, and even in this way where it's not Gemini, because that's the kind of, you know, the inverse of it that we keep talking about.
What do you make of this card being in the Thoth, the Libra sign? That's the Libra sign, right?
Yeah.
At the tip of that thing.
Yeah, it's the Libra sign.
Oh, it's an air sign as well. Libra is the second air sign, and then you have Aquarius, that's the third. So Libra is kind of the you could say level up from Gemini. So Gemini, you got subject object relationship. Libra, you're like, okay, how do I balance those? And then with Aquarius, it's how do I serve them from the space of what I am not? So it's still that duality, but it's in a different context each time, a kind of like more evolved context each time. So here we're trying to figure out balancing either partnerships, two ideas, two different things, and finding harmony in that, because that's exactly what Libra represents as peace.
I'm reading I'm going through the cards in this book, and so I'm learning all that because there's a lot of alchemical symbols on this, so it's pretty interesting. It's the moon in Libra, this card. The moon is on top and the Libra on the bottom.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, you know, we're talking a little bit about like rejection. The part of me is like, is rejection even a thing? Is that even like real? Is that just a delusion? And like kind of going into this sort of underworld, maybe there's like sense of, and like setting boundaries and whatnot. Some maybe feeling rejected from the world, like from the external world going in, or just feeling like it's a calling to eject from the material world in a way. And so it's like really interesting that piece, you know, because like I was reading from this book, this woman who's like tarot, she studied the tarot for a really long time. And her interpretation of the card is like a lot less charitable, you know, it's a lot more kind of like, it's the two, and basically it's like someone who is ready to strike anyone who comes too close, like, and the danger of getting too much into that inner world. So she's kind of more looking at like the potential dangers and cautions. And so it's kind of interesting to juxtapose that interpretation with this of peace. And this one, which feels a little bit more peaceful as well. So it's just sort of interesting to play with, yeah, that potentiality of getting flooded in some ways, like tsunami, versus it being a place of refuge and a place of peace. And I'm curious what you all think too about that interpretation of peace as well, compared to like caution.
The only thing that comes to me is that the thought like that being flooded is very real. It's very real that you can lose yourself in the flood. The woman sitting with her back to the ocean can very easily be overwhelmed.
It makes me think of like the calm before the storm, and again that empty beach with the. There's something. Peace is usually like a really positive word, obviously, but you could also think of it in that like, yeah,
something's coming.
And we were talking about that should actually be a warning.
Yeah.
If-
Yeah, maybe peace is kind of an unnatural state.
Mm.
Oh, this is really. I actually wrote a poem called "Calm Before and After," and it was about the calm before the storm. So it says, "Calm before and after. Drips trickle in while awaiting the storm. Splashing and puddling, they dance with the leaves. The blue sky leaves. The gray moves in. Over the light that shines from far beyond, where it is still. Still the storm has yet to arrive.
Distance rumbles in. It's a beautiful closing line.
It's exactly this. It's exactly this calm before the storm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I remember when I was writing that, it was like exciting because I knew there was a big storm coming. So it was like anticipation was actually building in me. And even though it was like the writing came out very calm and there was like a lot of slowness to the way I was writing, it was still like I wanted to feel that anticipation. I wanted that to be prolonged. I almost didn't want the thing to be revealed because I loved sitting suspended and waiting on it, the secret to be revealed or whatever it was that was going to come out.
To me, that's exactly the difference between neglect and rejection. Neglect is that waiting. You feel like, no, something's off. This is not it. This is not real. But you're waiting it out because you don't want the.
That wasn't where I was thinking you were going with that, actually. Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know, there's still like some sort of participation that I'm feeling in this instance that I'm talking about. Like I'm not revealing fully, I guess, what I'm talking about. But in the anticipation, like I don't feel neglected, if that's what you meant, because it almost feels like the presence is the reward, like the anticipation is like actually a reward, not feeling like it's being withheld from me. That is the magic.
My mind was jumping to something else. I didn't mean that's how you felt in that
Okay.
situation. I was just pulling back from a previous conversation. But that could explain, in my mind, that explains why some people enjoy the neglect, because there is something.
I was just thinking because I'm sitting in my neglected garden and like the weeds are sure enjoying not being pulled up here. So maybe, yeah, something about being hidden from people's attention. Like you're neglected because no one's paying attention to you. Like, and that's, that's kind of the story of my childhood. I was the child that didn't get the attention. But that gave me a weird sort of freedom to become a kind of a freaky sort of person that I became, because no one was like checking me or telling me I couldn't do things or anything, because all the attention was directed elsewhere. So like neglect maybe could not be entirely negative, or not in certain situations.
It almost feels like an additional neglect when that's the feeling, because I think I'm presencing like a real feeling, like that I actually have, like I'm bringing it to you right now, of like I don't know why this feeling is coming up. There's several groups that I'm a part of that are kind of like dissolving into new things, and so maybe that has part to do with it. Like I don't want to lose this too. So I think there's like something in me that's really speaking out loud and saying, please notice me when I say I don't feel seen. and it feels sharp and it feels invasive. It doesn't feel like a nice way to like bring attention. That's the thing. But it almost feels like there's no other way to say it. It's almost like when I was out snorkeling with that guy and I told him I can't make it. And he took that as, okay, I'll pull you, not hearing what I'm saying. So it is disruptive, and it's cold air. It's not engulfing and nice, and like, yeah, it can be really disruptive and tear things apart. And that's when it gets there, that's when it's like, because it hasn't been seen. And so but even further extending like beyond air, just like the nature speaking with us and showing us, like, because we keep saying like, yeah, okay, well, we'll recycle. Yeah, okay, we're gonna clean up a little bit, you know, we'll figure that thing out. We'll get that tomorrow. And yeah, there's just something very urgent when it gets to that point, when it spins out. And so I think that that's kind of what it is too. I'm noticing a tornado start with me, because when my rugs get pulled, I know what it feels like. And so I'm sensing it. And my rugs have started to get pulled. And I think that there's another rug rumbling out from underneath me right now that's been kind of like my structure for a long time. So it's very real what's coming out of me, because I don't think it's just me. I think there's a big crumbling happening. And I'm sensing it in my family, like I'm sensing my grandparents going. And that very much relates with what's happening in the world at large. Like, I don't think that egocentrically, I think that my patterns also project out to the larger pattern. And so, but it's like, you can't, what are we gonna do? Like hyper focus on my grandparents and like look at them and stare at them and, you know, just wait for it to happen. So I've been like exploring the idea of death doula. And so now that's like, you know, that came up a lot in a lot of these groups that we're involved in. And so part of me, like, that's where the air energy really needs to be around, is where's that information of how we bury, how we grieve, how things go, you know, how we allow things to pass on. So I think that's the sharp air energy that really wanted to come out, but just had no idea how to say it without it seeming central to one, when it's really like it feels like more of a collective crumbling.
I think you just presence the thunder in the water, that picture of the safe water, but there's thunder in it, and that danger that Holly talked about in the other card, or the warning of the book. It's you have this idea of being protected underneath the water, but actually you're isolated, and you're isolated with thunder. That is a disaster waiting to happen. That is a storm in the making. And I think that's what you presence.
And too about like bringing that water into the world through our tears, helping that water move. And sometimes that's all we can do, is let the water move. Breathe. And release.
I've been thinking a bit about I can't remember what they're called, but the women who keen in Ireland traditionally, I can't think of their name, but it's generally a crone, and she and sometimes, you know, a few of them will come to funerals, and they don't necessarily know the deceased, but they will just keen for them, and these keens are these, I mean, we all know how beautiful and strange they are, these keening songs, and what they do for the people grieving is they open up this kind of doorway to grief that allows the people who are there to experience and to let stuff come up out of them that they wouldn't have been able to do if they didn't have these women facilitating that. And I think there's something about that, about, you know, everyone's dying constantly and the world is ending constantly, and all our catastrophes, you know, Sarah's catastrophes, all of our catastrophes, all of our individual lives, as you say, are mirrored outwards. It's like that, you know, as without, so within thing. And where are the people who are keening for that and giving us the opportunity to keen, opening those grief portals? And maybe that's some of the work that some of us will be called to do in the world.
Yeah, that's exactly, you're presencing exactly what I feel like my job has been in, you know, psychology. But really, it's like, I just notice it's just being able to metabolize a lot of unprocessed grief and feelings that people just have a really difficult time accessing. And the more I sense into my body and into like the cycles and into the emotions that come and go and the waves, it's just clearer and clearer. So much of it is collective. It's like, you know, there's personal stuff too, but it's like there's something about, like you're saying, opening up that portal of the grief and metabolizing it for the whole in a lot of ways. And they have the same thing in kind of Mayan cultures. They hire professional weepers for those who didn't have enough people to mourn. Like they maybe lived a more isolated or life that didn't elicit as much love from their community. And the professional weepers were there to kind of help that soul move on to the next shoreline, because the tears are what moved that soul into the next. Like they had that whole myth of being on a canoe, and so the tears were the currency that allowed that canoe to reach the next form. And so, yeah, again, I love that presencing of like, your pain is not separate from mine. Like it's when we grieve or when we feel or when we work through something, we work through some sort of karmic knot. It's not just for our own self. It's fucking for the whole. You know, it's not trivial. Thank you. I'm really moved by this.
I was up in the hills the other day, and you guys know I have a relationship with my hills, the chalk hills around where I live. I was up walking with a friend, and he was having a really difficult time, but also, as well as, you know, being in a terrible mood, he also like was feeling sick and had a sore throat, and just like, and I was like, we should scream, let's get all this out, let's get it out and scream. He's like, I literally can't. Like, I was like, have no fear, sit back and I'll do it for you. And he said it was, he said it was weird. He didn't go as far as to say helpful. Watching me scream and cry out his grief. But I felt like I was doing something important in that moment. And definitely it changed his mood after watching me thrashing around and screaming my lungs out. And there's something about that, like, yeah, like Holly's saying, it's not just yours, and that means that we have this weird opportunity to do this trick where I can actually take some of Sarah's grief and feel it for her. Like, weird, but I think I can.
So where my mind is going, I want to ask a question, and it's not a very, because you talk about processing the collective struggles and past injuries and things, but do you think there's a future for humanity? Or should we learn how to grieve our own death? Are we dying? And should we learn how to accept that?
Both. Because we got the swords and the blindfold on. I don't know. I'm gonna turn my back to the subconscious on that.
There's a part of me that thinks that grief is the solution, like, to our survival.
Yeah.
Because grief,
Yeah, I think I'm also with Holly on that.
grief is love. Grief is the crying out for what we love most.
I don't know. I think we're in a cycle. I think we're at a low point, maybe, or going into a low point of that cycle. But cycles always come back around. But I like, and this is just, you know, my intuition, with absolutely no kind of, you know, awareness of the facts. My feeling is that we probably won't see the upswing in our lifetimes. I think that, like, I think nothing ever ends, and I think there will be an upswing, but like this kind of, it's time to, you know, I don't know. I think a lot about this period when the Roman Empire retreated from Britain. You know, the Dark Ages, right? Like absence of light. No one knows what's going on. Very little records about that time and how it would have been to be like a peasant, you know, and you've been farming this land for whoever knows, like for all of history. And then the Romans come in and they build all these crazy shit, and then they go away, and you're still there. And like the Roman ruins, just, I mean, they're still here. You can go visit lots of them, like see mosaics and stuff. There's a great novel that's set in that time period. I wish I could remember what it's called, but it's like, it gives you this really evocative sense of what it would have been like for those peasants going to the ruins would seem haunted and strange. A few generations pass, and no one actually remembers these strange people who came and built them, but they're still there. And I think that about, you know, about the big buildings, about our skyscrapers and stuff, and like the people are going to leave, and there's, you know, Google is going to be a big ruin that we all wander around and go, oh, I bet that's haunted. Like, that's actually my experience of the internet nowadays. Like I sort of look in there every so often and I get a bit spooked and retreat. So it's like, it's just a strange time. I mean, all times are strange. But we've been on this like hopped up on this myth of progress for such a long time that we keep expecting everything to keep getting better in this specific type of way, and to be like, well, actually no, maybe we're going to be the, you know, the Dark Age peasants fumbling around in the ruins for a while, and maybe that's what we need, and there'll be some kind of deepening. And yeah, and then like yes, but yeah, like on a personal level, every time I've collapsed, I've got back up. So I can't help but see that happening eventually. But
Yeah, I guess in that sense, what Sarah was saying, I think also about like it's a little bit of both. It also depends how you frame humanity. Like right now, I made this necklace. I don't know if you can see it. It's a jellyfish.
I'm so
Oh,
glad
you do.
because I was looking at it the whole time, so I'm glad you're speaking of it. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's a jellyfish, which seems to be in theme with all the water going on. So there's this part of me that is like, well, if we all become jellyfish, you know, like I'm okay with it. I mean, I don't know if I'm okay with that, but I guess that's what I mean. It's like a few days ago we were watching this documentary of a photographer who has taken pictures of like the most atrocious stuff you can imagine, like every genocide exodus thing in the past 30 years he was there taking pictures, and it was literally the most difficult thing to see that I've seen in a long time. And in his whole process, like at some point he was also like, yeah, after that I give up on humanity. I was like, there's no salvation for us. We should all just die. And then after giving up on photography, he went into reforesting this piece of land after his father died. So they were like, this used to be a jungle at some point, now it's dead. Let's start planting. And literally for 10 years, all they did was like plant and plant and plant and plant. And then animals came in. And then he was saying like even jaguars came back at some point, like a whole ecosystem that was dead for decades came back again. And after that whole process, he was like, I have hope again. So I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe salvation is not through us. Definitely not in the way that we are doing. Not with this myth of whatever is going on. But yeah, when I saw that, I was, yeah, there is something there. And I don't know where it is or how we humble ourselves into it. But I have hope.
What do you think, Lizelle? You brought the question up. You can't escape.
I was afraid that you'd say that. Well, I was thinking this morning of hope and despair. And I thought about what you said yesterday, Rebecca, about the lie and sometimes speaking not necessarily truth. I don't want to say a lie, but not truth is incredibly important for creativity. And at least that's me reframing. But
that's what I was trying to say, yeah.
Cool. But then someone else also brought up how we act. I don't know if it was Scarlett, how we act untruth or truth. And to me, at this stage, it feels as if hope is the biggest lie there is. I love the idea of cycles, but most definitely humanity as we know it
As a biologist, I don't think that humans, I mean, we're highly adaptable, so that's the thing. There might be offshoots of human that come about from this, but my thinking all this time has been that we're just trying to upload our consciousness onto a computer, at which point in the future someone will no longer know how to read that information and we will be back in the same state of amnesia that we are in now. So I think this is just a part of the bigger cycle that has already happened.
the eternal return in some weird way.
Yeah, because all of these civilizations that have fallen in our history, they thought that they were humans and they were doing it and they were living the best way that had ever been lived. And then they all fell and then something else came up. And it not, and so different. And I don't know, yeah. I find it very hard to think about humanity as a whole, actually. I really struggle with that. Because I feel connection to individual humans, but I don't feel that kind of like, I guess it's a similar feeling to nationalism, which I also don't feel. I don't feel like that group loyalty to humans as a whole. I feel loyalty to you, individuals, and the people I love, but I don't really feel like, humans. I don't have that.
I have kind of as well.
So it's hard when we talk about the future of humanity. Like, I don't even know what humanity really means to me.
But just to, because I didn't think it until now, but just to close my thought, I started by saying the untruth or the lie is what we need for creativity.
Mm.
Quote some wise woman I know. And then I said the biggest lie is hope. And maybe that is exactly then, as you said, what we need for the creativity to survive.
It's a spell. Hope is a spell. If you start nurturing it in you, then, like, if we all believe that the world is ending, there's no point in trying, then that is what will happen. Even if, and we might be right, and we will be right? But if we all start hoping, even though maybe some part of us thinks it's ridiculous, but we just brainwash ourselves into nurturing this little, and it doesn't have to be ridiculous, it doesn't have to be gauche. Like, we can find a way to make it, make sense to us and feel important and poignant. But if we keep nurturing it, even though on some level it is a lie, then at least the possibility of something hopeful happening is there. Whereas if but that's the constant struggle of being like a person who interprets the world through two lenses. Like, do we get out our swords and say, let's tot up all the evidence and see which way this is going, and then make our decisions about what to believe about the world based on that? Or do we go back into our bathtubs, listen to our heart, and find something there, and then bring that out of the bath into the world, like just through force of will, I have hope is a weird, it makes me think of Pandora's box, and like hope is the thing that's left in the box, and there's always that debate about, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it a good thing that we held on to hope, kept it safe in the box, or would it have been better if we'd let it go with everything else?
Because everything else in the box was bad. That's how everything. So
hope must be bad too, because that's why it was in the bad things box.
Well, but suppose hope is the biggest lie, and that's why it's bad. But if you embrace the untruth for the sake of creativity, then
like an affirmation, you might say, and you might not genuinely believe that you're a strong, powerful woman who doesn't need to smoke, but if you say it enough.
The word that just coming up for me is devotion. It's like hope is sort of kind of interesting. I'm not like totally resonating with it, but it's more just devotion, in whether something falls and rises, it's more just being devoted to being present with it, to being, there's like a devotion to the sacred, and like them surrendering to whatever pulse or whatever phase in that cycle that's there. Surrendering to how it's the outcome, but it's being devoted to the process and being devoted to the presence.
Devotion is in my mind, because I was thinking the way you go beyond good and evil or beyond any dualities is indeed to transcend them. And devotion may be a very good way to transcend hope and despair. Devotion.
Yeah, I just quickly drew this with lipstick. This is like my hope symbol, my hope sigil. I think you might have seen this one, Liz, a long time ago. So I don't know who told me this. I showed this to someone and they were like, oh, it reminds me of the Schrodinger light thingy. Like, is it a wave function or is it a particle function? So maybe there's something about that as well. It's like hope is like, it's something it's in the observation of hope more than hope itself. Yeah, to me, hope, I guess, I mean, it's hard to define, but the hope, as I understand it, it needs to have an element of, it's not like this mindless, positive, whatever. It has a strong understanding of surrender and of like, I do not control this. I don't have the answer. I do not know. But I still choose to be here. That's hope to me. It's a bit more in that sense. It's not like, oh, things are gonna get well, la 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 la. Like, no. It has a strong understanding of how fucked you are. And still being like, well, I'm gonna enjoy the ride. If this is what it is.
Yeah.
And maybe along the way something happens.
Words like faith and belief were coming up for me, which
Mm.
kind of run along that same.
Trust. Trust, and the etymology of trust is truth.
Yeah.
Even going back to lies and truth. Ooh, this web.
Ooh, so could you trust hope?
My instinct is no. My first thing that comes up is no. You can't trust hope. But yeah, I'm apparently a pessimist.
Well, I don't know that that's something that you trust. I think it is something you believe or something you have faith in. So
Or do.
It's
something
not a
you
fact. It's not a fact. Truth. It can be in any one moment, but yeah, there's a constant exploration for it. So yeah, I don't think that there's a way to find trust then in something that's so open, like
It's
hope.
a feeling more, isn't it, than a fact? Like trust is a feeling. Truth is a feeling. Like a feeling element to it.
A poem just came into my head, and I just found it. I don't actually know whether it's going to make sense, but just the title came into my head, and it's quite short. So if you'll indulge me, I'll read it to you. It's called "Hope Is the Thing with Feathers." I was like, feathers?
Whoa.
Exactly, right? It's by Emily Dickinson, and it goes like this: "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tunes without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me." It's from back in the days when people used to make poetry rhyme. It's interesting though, because it's like I was thinking about hope as something you do actively, like Sarah was saying, it's like faith is a practice, it's something you do. But in that poem it says, and never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. So she's obviously envisioning it as something out there that doesn't need to be called into being by our faith, that is just out there, like on the end of a little branch. It's actually making me feel quite sad thinking about that little hope is a thing with feathers, like that little bird that, even if we're not looking out of our windows. And also thinking about, as I often do, all the birds in wintertime when the weather gets rough and they're just out there seeing it through.
But their feathers protect them though.
Yeah, so maybe that's a hope is a thing with the protective feathers.
That's the thing with protection. It's about not making it redundant. Like there's I've heard all these. I love these stories about how they there's this very famous story about like this marble pillar, and they had like put 2 rocks on each end, and it was starting to sink because I guess the soil it was on, like they didn't want it to touch the soil until they would use it to build the building because it would get like all spoiled and dirty. So they put it on these like little rock at each end, and because the soil kept sinking, they were like, oh, it seems maybe it's gonna sag, let's put one in the middle. And then when they go check it out months later, the thing is broken in half because the middle was harder rock than the edges, so the edges sank and the thing just broke. So there's this thing about how excessive protection and excessive security can be the thing that breaks the whole system.
Yes.
But because you're not seeing all the dependencies and relationships. And there's a lot of stories like this, like literally like nuclear reactors that have gone off because let's make it safer by adding more things, and then you don't see how the more things react with the previous things, or it gives you that overconfidence of not paying attention. So I think there's that. It's like, it's not, I don't think it's hope, it's how you use it. Maybe it's when hope becomes redundant, when you try to just make it this overbuilt system and use it as some sort of shield to not pay attention. That's, I think, where the risk is. I don't think it's hope of its own. I think it's the redundancy.
Oh, I love that, because that kind of connects how this kind of started with Sarah talking about attention and needing to be seen. And that's how important paying attention is. And yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about scuba too, the example, because it's very important that you trust your equipment. You have to trust your equipment. You have to have faith in your equipment. You have to believe that your equipment will work, however we're going to put it. We have to hope that our equipment will work, because you get out there and there is a chance that your equipment will not work. Chances are it will. Most likely it will. And you can have faith and you can believe that that is the case. But it is that relationship that you have with your equipment. My dad's worst story ever diving was because he had a new regulator and he didn't know how to use it. So yeah, it's like that. You still have to be in relationship with whatever it is that you're believing in, and it does exist external to you. But yeah, there's something about just like knowing it. So in that example of like hope sitting out on a cold branch, just like, and I don't know how ethical this is, but offering birds, food in the wintertime or whatever, some people have something against that because it's like you prepare them to need you. So yeah, I don't know. There's something there too about just like, I don't know, at least observing the bird and paying attention to it and having that feeling towards it, even if that's all that you do. It's just, wow, you're out there really making it, and it does something in your mind. It does some sort of patterning in your mind.
On faith and hope, I have a little bit from our favorite book, the Bible.
Hey, first quote of the day. It's been
And it's me.
Well, that brought us together. God did bring us together. So,
Rebecca, you hang out with us enough, you're going to turn into a Christian.
Okay, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
what I hear is learning to listen to the unseen. Is what Holly was saying, finding your pulse. That really stuck with me, that phrase. It's like hearing your pulse amidst everything.
it's like listening to your pulse and then aligning it with the mother's pulse, the great mother's pulse.
The ocean at your back.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that happens to you if you sit by the sea and you breathe in time with it.
And with other people too.
Oh, that would be beautiful. All of us on a beach together, breathing in time with the sea.
But if we do it, one of us needs to have a blindfold.
We got our next ritual started.
I will do it. I will do that. I will say that if no one else wants to, but one of us needs to do that.
Oh yeah, I could do it as the tide comes in as well, so that you just, and we're all watching your back, so you know nothing bad's going to happen, but you'll get to feel those waves lapping at your back.
Trust.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, that's really exciting. It's like it's beautiful to think about taking each of the cards and turning them into
a ritual.
That's a really cool idea.
yeah, I like the idea of using ritual not just as like in it, like, because usually when I'm making rituals for other people, they're like often they're for something. So someone's like, I need a ritual for X or Y or whatever. But often when I'm working for myself, it's much more exploratory, because so I don't like I don't know why I'm standing next to the sea like and singing to it, or I don't know why I'm screaming in the hills. I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, these strange actions. But it's like the doing it is a way of thinking, like it's like it's a way of thinking through something. And I think that's what I was trying to say yesterday about creativity and lies and stuff. And like, you know, sometimes I'm doing stuff in ritual which is not honest. I'm performing, and yet through putting my body and mind through that performance, I learn stuff. And I think like it's kind of it's harsh to call that lying, but I think the line between lying and performance is super blurry. And I like defending my right to bend the truth and see what happens is important to me.
You're making the truth.
Yeah, exactly. It's play.
Yeah.
But also, like, I also sometimes when I have these discussions say things like, I what I'm about to say, I don't believe it necessarily.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how are you going to know what you believe unless you express it and then see what reactions happen in you and what reactions happen?
Yeah.
So sometimes we're going to lie, but that's how we learn.
I think that's kind of what the card's warning about like that thinking that you can come to the truth on your own, like that Holly was saying about the going too far in, like obviously introspection is important and good, but you can go too far in and think you can figure it all out in your own head, and then you end up like the Nine of Swords.
Yeah. Or it's like that person who thinks they're going to learn to swim by reading an instruction book about
Yeah, I feel like I've been that person many times, not with swimming but with other things.